Okay, so imagine this, right? You've got a dragon bursting out of a tomb and everyone's running around terrified. Sounds like, I don't know, Lord of the Rings or something,
You
right?
have to add a fantasy, yeah.
But what if I told you this wild scene is actually connected to a real historical figure, Charlemagne?
Yeah, it's a pretty awesome story, isn't it? It shows how much Charlemagne's story is this mix of like real history and legends and all this medieval drama. And I mean, he's this huge name. Everyone's heard of Charlemagne, synonymous with power. But his journey to becoming the Holy Roman Emperor, well, it was anything but straightforward.
So that's what we're going to be looking at today in this deep dive. We're going to be using some excerpts from the podcast, The Rest is History, and we're going to try and trace how Charlemagne went from being like just a Frankish warlord to like the most powerful ruler in Europe.
It's a really cool story, too, because it challenges how we think about the so-called Dark Ages. It wasn't just like decline and chaos. It was this really complex time of all these political moves and religious alliances that would change the entire course of European history.
So to understand all of that, I guess we've got to start with, well, kind of set the stage. You mentioned Charlemagne's predecessors, right? The Merovingian dynasty. What's the deal?
Yeah, so they started out super strong. Like, think of Clovis, the first Frankish king to unite all the Frankish tribes. But as time went on, their power just, I don't know, kind of fizzled out. They went from these powerful rulers to basically like figureheads. They still had the title of king, but they didn't really have any authority.
Okay, so how does that even happen? How do you go from like uniting an entire people to basically becoming a, would you say, a figurehead?
It was a gradual process for sure. But one of the key figures in this whole transition was Charles Martel, Charlemagne's grandfather. This guy was like a total military genius. Think about the Battle of Tours. That's where he defeated the Muslim army. And that's how he got his nickname, the Hammer. Just that victory alone secured the Franks' dominance and let them expand their territory even more.
Whoa, the hammer. That's pretty hardcore. So was he all about military stuff then? Just brute force?
No, he was also like incredibly smart politically.
Yeah.
He knew that the church was super powerful, so he aligned himself with them. He replaced a bunch of independent bishops with people who were loyal to him. And for him, it was all about loyalty, not so much about like how good they were at scholarship or ties to their communities. And this move, well, it basically killed Roman Gaul, as everyone knew it, and gave rise to Francia.
That's pretty bold. Replacing all these religious figures with your own guys. Did that cause any problems?
Oh, absolutely. Like, there was this one bishop, Eucharius. He was really outspoken, and he was so furious that he actually cursed Charles Martel, said he was going to hell.
Okay, now that's a story I need to hear more about.
So Eucharius, he was kind of like the old guard, those bishops who saw themselves as the real inheritors of the Roman way of doing things, their culture, their authority. And of course, he clashed with Martel, who, as you know, basically replaced him with his own guy. And then when Martel died, Eucharius claimed that he had this crazy dream, right? An angel came to him and showed him Martel down in hell, suffering.
Wow, that's quite the claim. So I'm guessing he didn't just, like, leave it at that, did he?
No, no way. He was so sure of his vision that he got people to open up Martel's tomb. And get this, according to the historical accounts, when they opened it, a dragon supposedly burst out of the tomb. And the inside of the tomb was all blackened, as if by fire. And of course, everyone took that as proof that Eucharius was right and that Martel was, roasting down in hell.
A dragon. Seriously, that's, I mean, talk about adding fuel to the fire.
Oh yeah, definitely captured people's imaginations. But here's the interesting thing. While Eucharius saw Martel as this evil villain, the Pope, down in Rome, he saw Martel as a possible ally.
That's an interesting contrast. What was going on there?
Well, don't forget, back then, the papacy was still part of the Byzantine Empire, and they were getting threats from, like, everyone. You had Muslim forces on one side and then the Lombards in Italy on the other. They really needed a strong protector. And who better than Martel, right? I mean, he had this huge Frankish empire and it was only getting bigger. And to show how badly they needed him, the Pope actually sent Martel the keys to St. Peter's tomb.
Wait, hold on. The keys to St. Peter's tomb, what was that all about?
It was a symbolic gesture, like showing how much spiritual authority the Pope had and how much he wanted Martel as an ally. It was basically saying, hey, we really need you to protect us, and we're willing to recognize how much power you have.
So Martel was the one who kind of set up this whole crucial relationship between the Franks and the papacy then. And, I mean, that relationship would have massive consequences later on, right?
Oh, absolutely. It was huge. So when Martel dies, his two sons, Pippin and Carloman, They inherited his position as, like, the mayor of the palace. They even briefly put this Merovingian king back in place as a figurehead, just to kind of keep up appearances.
But that sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. Two brothers sharing power, plus a puppet king. What could go wrong, right?
Right. It was a very volatile situation. But then something really surprising happens. Charlemagne, the older brother, he just decided to, like, step down from everything and become a monk.
He just walked away from all that power. That's wild. Why would he do that?
Well, some historical accounts say that he was just overwhelmed with guilt over some of the stuff he did, especially this really brutal massacre of the Alemanni tribe. So he went to Rome, asked the Pope for forgiveness, and basically retreated to this monastery in Monte Cassino.
Wow, so faith really played a huge role for some of these guys. So then you've got Pepin, the younger brother, and now he's the only ruler of the Frankish kingdom. What does he do with all this power?
Well, Pepin was a smart guy, and he was ambitious. And he realized that being mayor wasn't enough. He wanted to be the actual king, not just in practice, but officially. But there was one problem. He didn't have the legitimacy that the Merovingian kings had. He needed the church to back him up.
So how did he get their support?
He went straight to Pope Zachary with this really simple but, like, genius question. Is it right that the king of the Franks has no real power? It was such a clever move because it forced the Pope to really think about it and basically choose a side.
That's some serious power play. What did the Pope say?
Well, Pope Zachary, he had his own problems to deal with, remember? The Lombards were still a threat. And he saw Pepin as someone who could help him out. So he basically said, no, it's not right for a powerless person to be called king. And that gave Pepin exactly what he needed, the green light.
So he had the Pope's blessing, but did he just leave it at that?
No way. He went even further. Pepin got himself anointed with holy oil, just like the kings in the Bible. But he didn't stop there. He invited the new pope, Stephen II, to come to Francia and do the whole anointing ceremony again, but this time way more extravagant with all the bells and whistles.
Talk about making a statement. What was the point of doing it a second time?
It was a huge moment. When Pope Stephen II traveled all the way across the Alps to Francia, it was this massive symbolic shift. It was the first time a pope had ever traveled north of the Alps, and it totally solidified the alliance between the papacy and the Frankish kingdom.
It's like, I don't know, a medieval pilgrimage or something, all this symbolism and political maneuvering.
Yeah, exactly. So now Pepin was officially recognized as king by both the church and the Frankish nobles. And he didn't forget his promise to the Pope either. He took his armies across the Alps, not once, but twice, and defeated the Lombards. And he took back all the territories they'd taken from the papacy.
So he was a man of his word then. Made sure to back up that alliance with some military action.
Yep. He even took all the keys from the cities he conquered and put them on St. Peter's tomb, symbolically returning them to the Pope. And of course, the Byzantine emperor was furious, but there was nothing he could do about it. The Pope had a new protector, and the Frankish kingdom was now the top dog in Western Europe.
That's quite the legacy for Pepin to leave to his sons.
Yeah.
Right? A powerful kingdom, a strong army, and this crucial alliance with the papacy. Sounds like he set the stage for something pretty big.
Oh, he definitely did. When Pepin died, he left his sons, Charles and Charlemagne, this kingdom that was just primed for even bigger things. But like with any story about powerful brothers, there's going to be some conflict.
Oh yeah, classic sibling rivalry. So did these two brothers get along?
Not really. The historical accounts describe them as having this super tense and strained relationship. They divided up the kingdom between them, but there was basically zero trust. And some sources even say that Charlemagne's advisors were actively trying to start a war between the two brothers.
So you've got two ambitious brothers, a divided kingdom, and advisors whispering in their ears. Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It had all the ingredients for sure, but then something totally unexpected happened. Charlemagne died, suddenly. And from a nosebleed, of all things.
A nosebleed? Really? That's it. Seems almost too easy.
That's what the historical sources tell us. I mean, some people whispered about foul play and all that, but most historians think it was just, natural causes, even if it's a pretty strange way to go.
So however it happened, Charlemagne's death changed everything. Now you've got Charles, who we know as Charlemagne, as the sole ruler of the Frankish kingdom.
Exactly. And he was only 29 years old when he inherited this massive, powerful kingdom. But what really made Charlemagne different was his ambition. He wasn't content with just ruling what he already had. He wanted more. Much more.
Okay, now we're talking. This is where things start to get really interesting.
Oh yeah, you haven't heard anything yet.
All right, so we left off with Charlemagne inheriting this I mean, massive empire, thanks to all the work his father and grandfather did. So where does he go from there? What were some of his big moves?
Well, Charlemagne wasn't exactly the type to just, sit around. He was definitely a man of action, a true warrior king. He led something like over 50 military campaigns. Can you believe that?
Hmm.
And through all those campaigns, he expanded the Frankish Empire to a size no one had ever seen before.
So we're talking serious expansion here. Where did he focus all that energy?
Well, his first target was the Lombards down in Italy. Remember his father, Pepin, he had already defeated them once, right? And he secured some territory for the papacy, but they were still a threat. They were still kind of hanging around.
So Charlemagne was basically picking up where his father left off, but he had even bigger plans.
Exactly. He wasn't content with just like keeping the Lombards in check. He wanted to completely conquer them. And you know what? He did. In 774, his forces captured their capital city, Pavia. That was pretty much the end of the Lombard kingdom. And then Charlemagne, he declared himself king of the Lombards. So now he's got even more territory.
Wow, king of the Franks and king of the Lombards. That's like a ton of power.
Oh, and that was just the beginning. Next, he turned his attention to the Saxons. They were this Germanic, pagan people who lived to the north and east of the Frankish kingdom.
I've heard the Saxon Wars were pretty, well, brutal.
They were. It went on for like 30 years.
Huh.
And yeah, it was violent and brutal on both sides. Charlemagne, he was determined to conquer the Saxons and convert them to Christianity. And he didn't really shy away from using force to do it.
It sounds like it was more than just a land grab, like a clash of cultures, too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Charlemagne, he saw the Saxons resisting him as this huge threat to his power and to the stability of his whole kingdom. And he also really believed that converting them to Christianity was, the best thing for them. But the Saxons, well, they saw it as this attack on their whole way of life, their beliefs, their freedom.
So how did Charlemagne finally manage to subdue them?
It was a long and really bloody process. There were all these campaigns, massacres, people being forced out of their homes. He even destroyed some of their sacred sites. It was intense. Finally, in 785, Charlemagne won a decisive victory, and the Saxon leaders basically had to give in. They accepted baptism and all that. But even then, there were still uprisings. And Charlemagne, well, he resorted to some pretty extreme stuff to keep control. Like, there was this one massacre at Verdun in 782 where he had, get this, thousands of Saxon prisoners executed.
That's a dark reminder of just how brutal war can be, even when it's fought in the name of religion.
Yeah, it's a really dark chapter in Charlemagne's reign, for sure. But in the end, it did achieve what he wanted. It expanded his empire and helped spread Christianity.
Okay, so we've got the Lombards, we've got the Saxons. Who else did Charlemagne go after?
I mean, he was everywhere. His campaigns took him all over Europe. He fought the Avars in the east. That's how he expanded into what's now Hungary and Austria. And he went after the Umayyad Caliphate in Spain. And then there were the Bavarians and other Germanic people who had actually been allies of the Franks at one point. He even went after them.
By this point, Charlemagne's controlling a huge amount of territory. So what does he do with all this power and land? Was it all just about conquering, or did he have some idea of how to, govern this massive empire?
Oh, Charlemagne, he was a brilliant administrator. Just as good at that as he was at being a military leader. For him, it wasn't just about brute force. He set up this whole system of governors, counts, and dukes, and they ruled in his name in different parts of the empire. And he created this network of messengers who traveled all over the kingdom, keeping him informed about everything that was going on and making sure his orders were being followed.
So he's building the foundation for, a more structured and centralized government.
Exactly. He knew that he needed to have an efficient system of administration if he wanted to keep everything stable and under control. And he also reformed the legal system, made sure everyone was using the same weights and measures, and he even encouraged a revival of learning and culture. It was known as the Carolingian Renaissance.
Wait, hold on. A revival of learning and culture. This is starting to sound a little different from the whole, brutal Saxon Wars thing.
Right.
So he wasn't just a warrior, but a patron of the arts, too.
You could definitely say that. Charlemagne, he really believed in education and scholarship. He set up schools, supported monasteries, and had people copying all these old Roman and Greek texts. And his court, it became the center of learning, attracting all these brilliant minds from all over Europe.
It's amazing how he balanced all these, seemingly opposite roles. Conqueror, administrator, reformer, patron of the arts. It's like he was trying to create this whole new society.
He was a complex guy, that's for sure. But there's one more piece of the puzzle here. How did this Frankish warlord, this conqueror, actually become the Holy Roman Emperor?
Ah, yes, the big question. It all seems to lead up to that famous coronation on Christmas Day, 800 AD. Tell me about that moment.
All right, so picture this. It's Christmas Day, 800 AD. Charlemagne is in Rome for Christmas Mass at St. Peter's Basilica. He's kneeling in prayer, and all of a sudden, Pope Leo III places a crown on his head and proclaims him Emperor of the Romans.
Wow, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. But why? Why did the Pope do that? What was the motivation behind making Charlemagne emperor?
There are actually a couple of different ways to look at this. Some historians think Charlemagne was totally caught off guard by the whole thing, while others think it was all carefully planned out between him and the Pope.
Okay, let's break that down a little. What was going on in the world that could have led to something this dramatic?
Well, the Byzantine Empire, the ones who still claim to be the real Roman Empire, they were a mess. The Empress Irene was in charge, but a lot of people in the West saw her as illegitimate. And there was this growing feeling that the Roman Empire, the real one, needed a strong leader, someone who could actually, lead.
And Charlemagne, with his massive empire, all his military victories, and his super close alliance with the Pope, he fit the bill perfectly, right?
Exactly. So when the Pope crowned Charlemagne emperor, it was like he was making a big statement. He was saying, look, the real Roman Empire is here in the West now, and it's under the protection of the Frankish king, the Byzantine emperors. They're not the real deal anymore.
So this wasn't just symbolic. It was a huge shift in power with massive implications for the future of all of Europe. But did Charlemagne actually want to be emperor? Did he accept this new title?
That's the thing. According to his biographer Einhard, Charlemagne was actually hesitant at first. He supposedly said that if he had known what the Pope was planning, he wouldn't have even gone to church that day.
Really? Why would he be hesitant? I mean, becoming emperor would be like reaching the top, right?
Well, it was a risky move. Accepting the title of Roman Emperor was basically a direct challenge to the Byzantine Empire. And it could also cause problems with the Pope, who might start to see Charlemagne as a rival for power.
So it was a tricky situation with all these political consequences to consider.
Exactly. But in the end, Charlemagne accepted the title, took the crown, and ruled as Emperor of the Romans for the rest of his life.
What a story. I mean, from Frankish warlord to King of the Franks and Lombards, to conquering all these territories, and then finally to Holy Roman Emperor. It's an incredible rise to power.
It really is. And his time as emperor had a huge impact on all of European history. He basically laid the groundwork for what would become the Holy Roman Empire, which lasted for centuries. And he helped shape the whole political and religious landscape of Europe. Basically solidified that bond between the papacy and the Frankish kingdom.
This has been such an amazing journey through history. We've covered so much, from Charlemagne's military victories to how he reformed the government, for the brutality of the Saxon Wars to the Carolingian Renaissance, and then, of course, that incredible moment when he became the Holy Roman Emperor.
Which is quite a story.
Okay, so we've traveled with Charlemagne from those early days as a Frankish warlord, through all those conquests and alliances, all the way to that dramatic moment when he became Holy Roman Emperor. But now I think it's time to shift gears a bit and talk about his legacy. What kind of lasting impact did Charlemagne actually have on history?
It's really interesting because his legacy is so complex. I mean, it has so many different facets. He wasn't just some warrior king. His conquests and, the political reforms he made, they were like the foundation for what would eventually become modern Europe. He understood that military power was just one part of the equation. He also had to create these systems of government and law and culture.
So he was literally building empires, not just through military might, but in a more, holistic way.
Yeah, exactly. He oversaw this huge transition from that really fragmented world of late antiquity to the much more, cohesive structures that we see in the Middle Ages. And speaking of those cultural transformations, we talked a little bit about the Carolingian Renaissance earlier. Can you tell us a bit more about that? It's pretty amazing how he managed to encourage this revival of learning during such a chaotic time.
It is. It's almost hard to imagine this guy who was leading armies and conquering territories also being this, champion of the arts and learning.
Right. But, even though he was this warrior, Charlemagne really did value education. He totally got that knowledge was power. He surrounded himself with all these really learned men, and he actively tried to promote literacy throughout his kingdom. He even tried to learn how to read and write himself. Although, according to his biographer, it seems like he never quite mastered it.
Ah, that makes him seem kind of, more human.
It does. But the thing is, he didn't let his own struggles stop him from pursuing his vision. He set up all these schools and monasteries and cathedrals, which meant that future generations of clergymen and scholars would be well educated. And he also had people copying and preserving all these ancient texts from Rome and Greece. I mean, because of his efforts, so many works of literature and philosophy that could have been lost forever were saved.
So he basically played a huge role in rescuing all this classical knowledge for, I guess, the rest of us.
Absolutely. He was instrumental in preserving that intellectual heritage of antiquity, which then laid the groundwork for, later Renaissance movements.
But of course, it wasn't all cultural revival and expansion. I mean, we talked about the Saxon Wars. Those were incredibly brutal. Do you think that kind of tarnishes his legacy?
It's tough. I mean, how he dealt with people he saw as threats, either to his power or to Christianity, was often really harsh. We can't ignore the forced conversions, the massacres that people forced from their homes. Those things definitely happened.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that history is rarely simple. Even people who are considered great did some pretty terrible things.
Right. It's important to acknowledge both the good and the bad, I think.
Now, let's go back to that moment when Charlemagne was crowned Holy Roman Emperor. Christmas Day, 800 AD. You mentioned that there are some different interpretations of how that all went down. Can you tell us a bit more about those different theories?
Sure. So some historians think that the Pope's decision to crown him was mostly a political move. The Byzantine Empire was weak. The papacy needed someone powerful to protect them. And crowning Charlemagne basically shifted the authority of the Roman Empire to the West.
That makes sense. But what about Charlemagne himself? Was he actively trying to become emperor?
Well, his biographer claimed that Charlemagne was totally taken by surprise. Some historians think that's true, while others see it as, like, Charlemagne playing it cool. Like, he was in on it, but he didn't want to seem too ambitious.
And maybe he was part of it all along, but he wanted to appear a bit more, I don't know, humble.
Maybe. But whatever his real feelings were, that coronation was huge. It set a precedent for the Pope to get involved in secular matters, which would have consequences for a long time.
Right. It kind of blurred the lines between religious and political power.
Exactly. And that tension between the papacy and these secular rulers would continue to play out throughout European history. Charlemagne's coronation is like a key moment in that ongoing power struggle.
So as we kind of
I think the biggest thing is that Charlemagne was a man of contradictions. He was this brilliant military strategist, but he was also a capable administrator, a reformer who pushed for education and the arts. But he was also capable of some truly ruthless things.
a good reminder that history and people are rarely black and white.
Absolutely. He was a product of his time, which was this period of massive upheaval and change, and he shaped the course of history, but it was also shaped by the forces around him. His legacy, both the good and the bad, still affects Europe and the world we live in today.
This has been such an amazing journey, from that dragon bursting out of the tomb to the crowning of an emperor. Charlemagne's story is a wild ride, full of ambition, power, faith, and unfortunately a lot of violence. It reminds us that history is full of these unexpected twists and turns and these larger-than-life characters who left these legacies that still impact us today.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It's been my pleasure.